19 German shepherds stood in the back row of a mountain shelter, while snow buried the road outside and everyone said they were too broken to save. A retired Navy SEAL named Cole Bennett looked at the thin bodies, the bright eyes, and the old dog, who would not bow his head, and saw what a whole town had missed. Snow came down over McCall, Idaho so thick that morning that the stop signs looked like red coins pressed under white cloth. Along the road to Valley County Animal Shelter, plows groaned pine branches bent low, and every truck in the lot wore a soft cap of powder by the time Cole Bennett stepped out of his old pickup and pulled his Navy coat close at the throat. He had come for paperwork. That was what he told himself as he crossed the icy lot with his boots crunching in the packed snow. One hand still stiff from the cold and the other carrying a folder of permits for the abandoned search dog facility his father had left behind. Paperwork was clean. Paperwork had edges. Paperwork did not look back at you with yellow-brown eyes from behind chain link. Inside the shelter smelled of bleach-wet fur, coffee burned too long, and the tired patience of people doing too much with too little. A young clerk with pink cheeks sent him toward the back office, but the sound reached him before the office door did. Not barking. That was the strange part. 19 German shepherds stood in the far kennel row without making a storm of noise. They were thin in the way working dogs become thin when nobody understands that muscle and spirit still live under the ribs. Their coats had dulled from weeks of poor care before the county seized them from a breeder outside town. Some were sable, some black and tan, one nearly solid black except for dusting at the muzzle. Their paws were cracked from frozen concrete. Their ears, those proud triangular flags, were half raised. Not defeated, only cautious. The staff had put yellow warning cards on several kennel doors, but Cole noticed that the cards said more about fear than about the dogs. Fear bites when it has no room left. He knew that. He knew it in men. He knew it in himself. At the end of the row stood an older sable male with a black saddle, a white mark on his chest, and a scar along one front leg. He did not press against the gate. He did not retreat. He stood in the middle of the kennel as if the floor beneath him were a deck in rough water and he had decided to ride it out. Cole stopped there longer than he meant to. The dog lifted his nose, drew in the air once, and fixed on Cole with a gaze so steady that the hallway seemed to narrow around the two of them. "That one is Ranger," said a voice behind him. Cole turned. Dr. Linda Hayes stood with a clipboard under one arm, gray hair tucked beneath a knit cap, eyes sharp as boot tacks. Her hands smelled faintly of antiseptic and black coffee, exactly as Cole remembered from childhood. He came in with the rest. We think he led them or kept them from tearing each other apart. Hard to tell which. Maybe both. Cole looked back at the dog. "What happens to them?" Linda pressed her lips together. "We hold them as long as we can. Then a decision gets made by people who do not come down this row." She did not dress it up. Cole appreciated that. He had spent too many years around men who polished hard truths until they reflected nothing useful. Before he could answer, the front door opened with a slap of wind and snow, and Bryce Dalton's voice filled the shelter as naturally as exhaust fills a closed garage. Bryce owned the biggest kennel operation around Payette Lake, a clean place with glossy brochures, expensive fencing, and dogs that looked perfect in photographs. He was broad across the belly and shoulders, wrapped in a fleece-lined jacket that probably cost more than Cole's truck payment. He came in with two men behind him and a laugh already prepared. "Well, look at that," Bryce said, spotting Cole by the back kennels. Bennett boy found himself a bargain aisle. The clerk looked down at her desk. Linda's face went flat. Cole did not move. Bryce walked closer, boots squeaking. The dog stayed quiet, but the air changed. "You thinking of taking those on 19 mouths, 19 lawsuits, and 19 ways to ruin whatever is left of your daddy's place?" He leaned toward the kennel where Ranger stood. "That is not a rescue prospect. That is trouble with teeth." Ranger's ears flicked once. That was all. Cole felt the old familiar pressure rise in his chest, the one that wanted to answer fast and hard. The one that had gotten him through places where hesitation could cost lives. He let it pass. Snow tapped the high windows. A dog coughed softly 2 kennels down. Cole looked at Bryce, then at Linda. "What is the adoption fee?" Bryce laughed so loudly that one of the younger dogs flinched. "You hear that? He is serious." Cole kept his voice even. "I asked what the fee is." Linda studied him for a long second, not with doubt, exactly more like she was checking whether the man in front of her understood the weather he was volunteering to stand in. "Fees can be waived for special placement if the facility is approved. Mine is not approved yet." "It was once," Linda said. "Your father kept better records than most offices." Bryce shook his head. "Your father worked with trained dogs, Cole, not backyard leftovers. This is a pack of liabilities." Cole turned toward the kennels. 19 pairs of eyes watched him. Not hopeful. Hope took time. They watched the way animals watch a door that might open or might bring another person with a rope and a loud voice. He thought of his father's old training yard, sitting dark under snow, the kennels empty since the funeral, the faded sign that still read Bennett Mountain Search Dogs, though no dogs had crossed that gate in years. He thought of nights in San Diego when he sat on the edge of his bed and listened for sounds that were not there. He thought of a teammate whose last words had been calm, because that was the kind of man he had been, and of the lesson Cole had never managed to unlearn. You did not walk away from a living thing that still had a chance to come home. "I'll take them," Cole said. The clerk made a small sound, half gasp, half dropped breath. Bryce smiled as if he had been handed a story he could carry around town all winter. "You just bought yourself a snowbound circus." "Maybe," Cole said. "I'll let you know how it goes." That made Linda look away, but not before he saw the corner of her mouth move. The next 2 hours were paperwork, phone calls, keys, warnings, and the awkward ballet of moving frightened dogs without making them feel trapped. Mason Reed, a quiet 16-year-old doing community service at the shelter, appeared with a stack of blankets and a face too serious for his age. He did not say much, but he watched Ranger the way Cole had, as if something in the old dog's stillness made room for him to breathe. They loaded the dogs in 2 trips because Cole's truck and borrowed trailer could not safely carry them all at once. The road back to the Bennett place climbed through dark pines, past summer cabins sealed for winter and mailboxes wearing white hats. The dogs shifted in their crates but did not panic. Ranger rode in the last crate, eyes open, nose angled toward the vents. When Cole finally reached the old training yard, dusk had turned the snow blue. The kennels stood in a row beside the barn, repaired enough for shelter, but still smelling of cedar rust and years gone quiet. He opened each crate with patience, letting the dogs step down on their own. Some crouched, some shook. One young female pressed herself against the trailer until Mason, who had ridden back with him, crouched 10 feet away and pretended to be fascinated by a glove in the snow. Slowly she came out. Ranger was last. The old dog stepped down, tested the snow with one paw, then lifted his head. Wind moved through the pines behind the kennel yard. It made a low sound, almost like a warning and almost like a welcome. Cole opened the main gate. Morning broke pale over the Bennett place, though the word broke gave the sun too much credit. It pressed weakly through the snow clouds above McCall, Idaho, turning the drifts silver and the pine trunks black, while Cole stood in the kennel yard with a dented feed bucket in one hand and 19 German shepherds watching him. As if breakfast might be a trick. The old training facility had been built by his grandfather and kept alive by his father, 2 men who understood mountains better than they understood small talk. Cole had not planned to revive it. Plans were things men made before the world showed them its teeth. He had come home from San Diego after the funeral with 2 duffel bags, a truck that needed a heater core, and a silence inside him. that no amount of ocean noise had fixed. His father's house waited at the edge of the property square, shouldered and stubborn under snow, with a porch rail bowed from years of weather. Inside were rooms that still held the shape of the man who had lived there. Boots by the mudroom door, a coffee mug in the sink, a Bible with a cracked spine on the table beside a stack of dog-eared notebooks. Cole had avoided those notebooks for 3 days. He could clear ice from water buckets. He could mend kennel latches. He could sleep in a chair with a radio on low. Opening his father's handwriting felt harder. Yet the dogs had changed the order of things. They required information. They required him not to drift. So after feeding them small portions soaked warm, after checking paws and bedding and making sure no dog guarded food from another, Cole carried the notebooks to the kitchen table and read until the windows went dark. They were not sentimental. That helped. His father had written weather, scent conditions, wind direction, dog behavior, failures, improvements, names of missing hikers found, and names of handlers who needed to learn when to stop talking. In the older books, his grandfather's hand was tighter, almost cramped, but the mind behind it was clear. He wrote about snow as if it were paper. He wrote that a trail buried under 6 new inches was not gone, only translated. He wrote that fear and aggression wore similar coats, but left different tracks if a handler had enough humility to look. One sentence appeared in the margins again and again, sometimes underlined, sometimes boxed, once written across a whole page after a February rescue in 1989. Snow remembers the honest tracks. Cole read it aloud at 2 in the morning and felt foolish, then less foolish, then cold in a way the stove could not fix. The next day he drove to Dr. Linda Hayes' clinic with Ranger in the passenger crate and the notebook on the seat beside him. The road ran along the lake where ice had formed in dull plates near the shore. Ranger rode without whining, steady as a chief petty officer, though he watched every passing snow berm like it might report back. At the clinic, Linda examined him while Cole kept one hand near the dog's shoulder and did not crowd him. Ranger allowed the thermometer with grave disapproval. He tolerated the stethoscope. When Linda touched the scar on his front leg, he turned his head and looked at Cole, not threatening, just informing him that this had been noticed. "Old injury," Linda said. "He compensated for it a long time. That is why he stands square but carries weight a little differently when he turns." "Can he work?" Cole asked. "Not the way young men think work means." She gave him a look over her glasses. "That may be a blessing." Cole almost smiled. Almost. He opened the notebook to the line. Linda read it and rested her hand on the page longer than necessary. "Your father believed that with his whole heart. What does it mean? It means the mountain keeps more records than we do. A dog that learns to read snow learns to read what people miss. Weight, direction, panic, pauses. The place where someone fell and tried to get up. The place where someone stopped because they lost hope." She closed the notebook gently. "It also means you cannot bully a dog into truth. You can only give him enough trust to show you what he knows." Ranger sneezed on her boot. Linda looked down. "And sometimes he will make comments." Cole did smile then, and the smallness of it surprised him. Linda grew serious again. "These dogs came from a bad setup. I will not dress that up. But I looked at the seizure notes. Cold barn, not enough care, too many litters, yet several of them kept weight better than they should have." They watched each other. The older ones let the younger ones eat. "That tells me something. That they survived. That they organized," she said. "Survival is sometimes luck. Organization is character." Cole thought of Ranger standing in the middle of the kennel, not cornered, not begging. "Bryce said they are trouble." Linda snorted. "Bryce says anything that does not come with a certificate and a price tag is trouble. He has pretty dogs. Some are good dogs, but he breeds for what wins attention. Your father trained for what brings people home." Those words followed Cole back through town. At the hardware store, 2 men near the counter stopped talking when he walked in. which meant they had been talking about him. One asked how his wolf army was settling in. Cole bought straw carabiners, a new snow shovel, and a box of screws. "They're dogs," he said. "That is what they want you to think," the man replied, and the other laughed as though the joke had ribs. Cole did not feed it. He had learned long ago that some men mistook a quiet answer for surrender because they had never studied silence closely. Back at the property, Mason was waiting by the gate, hands jammed in his coat pockets, black hair full of snow. "Shelter said you might need help," he muttered. "Shelter or Linda?" Mason looked at his boots. "Both." Cole let him in. They spent the afternoon repairing windbreak panels and naming only what needed names on the feed chart. Ranger already had his. A shy black female became June because Mason said she looked like she was waiting for a warmer month. Cole considered telling him not to get attached, then remembered the notebooks. A dog did not become safer because a human pretended not to care. By late afternoon, the clouds lowered and the world went blue again. Cole took Ranger into the fenced yard on a long line. Nothing fancy, no commands that demanded more than the dog could give. Walk. Stop. Wait. Come if you choose. Ranger chose slowly, which Cole respected. They moved across the snow between old training posts nearly buried to their tops. The dog's nose dipped once, twice, then lifted into the wind. His whole body changed. Not tense exactly, focused. Cole followed his gaze toward the pines at the far edge of the property. "What is it?" he said softly. Ranger took one step, then another, until the line came tight. In the distance, under the quiet hiss of snowfall, something knocked against wood. Once, then again. Mason heard it too and stood up from the kennel door he was fixing. Cole's hand closed around the line. Ranger did not bark. He only looked back at Cole with an expression that felt older than training, older than fear, as if the mountain had just opened a page and the dog was waiting to see whether the man could read. By the third week of January, the Bennett place had become a white island on the north side of McCall, Idaho, with the road in half erased every morning, and the kennel roofs buried under clean, heavy snow. The air snapped at exposed skin, water froze in buckets between checks. Each gate latch tried to bite bare fingers, and every breath came out like a small ghost that vanished before it could explain itself. Cole set the rhythm before sunrise because rhythm was kinder than emotion when frightened animals were learning a new world. Feed warmed and softened, bedding shaken dry, paws checked, kennels cleaned, short turnout in pairs or alone depending on what each dog could handle. No rushing, no shouting, no heroics. He wrote everything in his father's notebooks, though he used a fresh one for the current dogs. Ranger Sable male, 7 years steady with handler watches wind before sound. June Black female high. Startled response to metal accepts food when hand stays low. Atlas, young black and tan male, eager, poor impulse control, steals gloves with professional confidence. That last note made Mason laugh, a quick startled sound he tried to hide in his collar. Atlas had taken the left glove off Mason's hand that morning, carried it 6 feet, and sat on it as if property law favored whoever had the warmer backside. "He is a criminal," Mason said. "He is employed in textile relocation." Cole answered, and Mason looked at him with surprise, as though humor from Cole required a permit. The small joke warmed the yard more than the sooty did. Still, most of the town saw only risk. At Carter's Hardware, where men gathered around the coffee machine to discuss road closures and other people's mistakes, Cole became a winter entertainment. Bryce Dalton had made sure of that. Every version of the story grew more expensive and less sensible. By Friday, Cole had supposedly mortgaged the Bennett land to buy wild dogs from a prison. By Monday, Ranger had bitten a deputy, which was interesting news to the deputy who had been in Boise all weekend. Cole corrected none of it unless the lie could harm the dogs. Let people spend their breath. He had snow to move. The one person who did come to the property with official concern was Hannah Carter. She drove up in a county SUV with chains on the tires and her 10-year-old son Liam in the back seat, because school had closed early. Hannah wore a red knit cap, a radio clipped at her shoulder, and the calm, alert face of someone who answered emergencies for a living and had learned not to waste panic. Liam stayed close to the vehicle, looking at the kennels with his shoulders tucked up. Cole noticed the scar on the boy's wrist, pale against winter skin. Hannah noticed Cole noticing and moved half a step in front of him without making a show of it. "I am here because we have had calls," she said. "Noise complaints, concern complaints." Bryce Dalton used both words several times. "That sounds like Bryce." Her mouth twitched despite herself. "I need to know your containment plan, vaccination schedule, emergency contact, and what you intend to do if one of them gets loose." Cole handed her a folder. "Most of that is in there. Linda has the medical schedule. Containment is double-gated, long line only outside fenced areas, no public access, no group turnout until stable." Hannah opened the folder and her eyebrows lifted at the neatness. "You expected me." "I expected the county. There is a difference. Sometimes." Ranger stood inside the main run, watching them through the wire. He had not barked once. Liam stared back with a child's mixture of fear and unwilling fascination. "Does that one bite?" he asked. Hannah stiffened, but Cole answered as if the question deserved respect. "I do not know yet, so we do not put him in a position where he thinks he has to." Liam frowned. "That is not what people usually say. People usually want easy answers." Ranger lowered his head, sniffed once through the fence, then turned away and sat with his chin toward the boy, an old dog's version of politeness. Liam did not move closer, but his shoulders came down a little. Mason arrived halfway through the inspection late because the school bus had gotten stuck behind a plow. He carried a backpack, 2 bent screwdrivers, and a look that said he expected to be told he had done something wrong. Hannah recognized him. Everyone in a small town recognized a boy on community service. Cole saw Mason brace for her tone before she spoke. "Afternoon, Mason." "Ma'am." No lecture followed. That helped. The day went almost well until the wind rose after dark. It came from the lake, hard and sideways, lifting loose snow off the ground and throwing it against the kennel panels with dry, rattling force. Cole made extra rounds at 9, then 11. At midnight, he woke in the chair by the kitchen stove with Ranger's silence in his head. That made no sense. The dog was outside with the others. Yet something in the pattern of the night had changed. He pulled on boots and coat and stepped into a world where the storm had erased depth. The kennel lights blurred in snow. One gate at the far run slammed once, twice, hanging crooked where an old hinge had split from the post. Cole ran feet punching through crust. 3 dogs barked now, sharp and frightened. The run was empty. Ranger's run. Mason, who had been sleeping in the tack room because the roads were too bad to send him home safely, burst out behind him with his coat half zipped. "What happened?" "Hinge failed." Cole clipped a light to his jacket and scanned the ground. Tracks showed for 8 feet, then vanished where wind had combed the snow flat. A lesser handler might have cursed. Cole only felt the old cold enter his blood, the one that came when a plan broke and the world narrowed to what could still be done. He grabbed a long line of radio and a pouch of high-value food. Then he stopped. Ranger had not bolted toward the road. The broken gate opened toward the tree line. Cole crouched near the last visible print. Deep front pressure. No frantic scatter. A turn into the wind. He had not run away in panic. He had gone somewhere on purpose. "Stay with the others," Cole told Mason. "If any gate shifts, you call me. You should not go alone." "I am not." Mason looked past him into the white dark. "The dog is gone." Cole tightened his gloves. "Not gone. Ahead." He moved into the pines with the radio hissing at his shoulder. Snow struck his face, melted, froze again along his collar. The old training paths were buried, but his body remembered grade and distance from years of childhood trailing after his father. 10 steps past the lower shed, he heard nothing. 20 steps farther, he heard it a single bark low and controlled not from alarm, but from location. Cole changed direction. His hands were shaking now and not from cold. A memory rose without asking. White mountains in another country, a voice on comms going thin, a teammate somewhere below a ridge, where the snow had taken all edges from the world. Cole forced his breath into count. 4 in. Hold. 6 out. The bark came again. He pushed through a stand of young fir and saw Ranger 20 yards below near the drainage ditch that bordered the old county road. The dog stood beside a shape half hidden by drift, turning his head between Cole and the snow. Not a deer, not debris. A man lay beside an overturned mail sled, one leg pinned under the runner, face gray in the beam of Cole's light. Ranger had not touched him. He had simply stayed body-angled against the wind, making himself a marker the storm could not fully erase. Cole dropped to his knees. "Sir, can you hear me?" The man's eyelids fluttered. Ranger leaned close, warm breath visible against the man's cheek. Cole keyed the radio with one hand and pressed 2 fingers to the man's neck with the other. "Hannah, this is Cole Bennett. I need medical response at the lower drainage off Old Lake Road. 1 adult male conscious but hypothermic, leg trapped. Ranger found him." Static answered. Then Hannah's voice came through sharp and clear enough to cut the storm. "Say again." "Ranger found him." The storm eased by morning, but McCall, Idaho woke under so much snow that the world looked remade by someone with a quiet hand and a stubborn heart. The mountains stood hidden behind cloud roofs, sagged with white weight, and the lower drainage off Old Lake Road held a mess of tire tracks, sled marks, boot prints, and one clean line of paw prints that every deputy and EMT seemed to glance at when they thought no one was watching. The injured mail carrier's name was Harold Pierce. 71 years old, though he insisted from the ambulance that he was not a day over stubborn. His little delivery sled had slipped from the road while he tried to bring medication to a shut-in widow. And if Ranger had not gone through the broken kennel gate at the exact wrong time or the exact right one, Harold might have been under snow until daylight. Cole did not say that aloud. Neither did Hannah. She arrived with the EMT crew, face pale under her red cap, and went still for half a breath when she saw Ranger lying beside Harold as calmly as if a county rescue scene were a rug by the stove. "That dog yours?" one deputy asked. Cole looked at Ranger. Ranger looked back, unimpressed by legal complexity. "I am his handler for now." The deputy nodded as if that made more sense than ownership. Ranger allowed Cole to clip the long line to his collar, then rose slowly, favoring the scarred front leg. Cole noticed. Linda would too. By the time the ambulance left, Harold had insisted on thanking that old snow-colored general. Even though Ranger was sable and not remotely interested in public gratitude, the story reached town before Cole did. Stories traveled faster on snow days because everyone was home. Everyone had a phone, and everyone needed something to season their coffee. By noon, the hardware store version had Ranger digging Harold from an avalanche with his bare teeth, which was not true, and would have annoyed the dog if translated. By 2, Bryce Dalton had begun his counter version. "A loose dog stumbled onto a man in a ditch," he told anyone who would listen. "That is not training. That is dumb luck wearing a collar." Cole heard this from Mason, who arrived after school with his jaw tight and his backpack hanging off one shoulder. "He said you are making the whole thing up to save face." Bryce is free to spend his afternoon poorly. "Doesn't it bother you?" Cole was kneeling in June's kennel, holding a bowl of warm food while the black female decided whether the world had earned another inch of trust. "It bothers me less than scaring this dog would." Mason watched June creep forward paw by paw. "I would want to tell everybody. That is because you are 16. What would you do if you were 16? Cole considered it. Something dumb with a lot of volume. Mason gave a reluctant grin. June took one mouthful, retreated, then came back for another. That was victory. Not loud, not marketable, but real. Later that day, Linda drove up in her clinic truck tires, wearing chains, hair flattened by a wool hat. She examined Ranger in the tack room while Cole stood by the workbench and pretended not to hover. "He needs rest," she said. "You know that." "I know. Knowing and doing are cousins who do not always visit." She flexed Ranger's leg gently. The old dog sighed a deep theatrical sound. "Yes, sir, I am also sorry medicine exists." Mason, sweeping straw near the door, hid a laugh. Linda looked through the seizure records she had brought, then set a photocopy on the bench. "I dug into the breeder. Papers are a mess, but there is something here. Several dogs trace back to White Pine lines." Cole looked up. "White Pine as in White Pine Rescue Dogs." "The same. Your father worked with two of them in the 90s. Cole had heard the name as a boy, always spoken with respect. White Pine dogs were not bred for show. They were mountain dogs, steady weather-wise, slower to impress and harder to fool. How did that line end up at a bad kennel? Linda's face closed a little. Good things get inherited by careless people all the time. She tapped the old scar on Ranger's leg. This one has work behind him. Maybe not formal, maybe not kind, but he knows how to choose wind. That is not an accident. After she left, Cole went into the house and opened a cardboard box he had avoided since the funeral. His father's things had been packed by church ladies who meant well and labeled everything in neat marker. Photos, training awards, receipts, old collars. He found the photograph beneath a stack of faded certificates. His father stood younger and leaner in front of the old kennel sign, snow to his knees, one hand resting on the neck of a German shepherd with a black saddle and a white mark on its chest. Not Ranger. The muzzle was different, the ears sharper, the eyes lighter, but the likeness was close enough that Cole sat down at the kitchen table before he realized he had moved. On the back in his father's block print were the words Caleb with Birch White Pine Male, February 1996, dog red wind better than any man I knew. Cole turned the photo over again. Ranger lay in the mudroom doorway watching him. Your family tree has some ghosts in it, Cole said. Ranger blinked once. The next week became a stretch of small tests and smaller proofs. Cole buried Mason's glove under 6 inches of snow and watched Ranger find it in under a minute. Then watched Atlas dig 3 wrong places and present a pine cone with prud. Not the assignment, Cole said. Atlas wagged as if feedback were applause. June took 3 days to cross the training yard without freezing at the sound of a chain. And when she finally did, Mason whispered, "Good girl," so softly that the words barely steamed in the air. Hannah came once to update the county file and found Liam standing at the fence while Ranger sat 10 feet away, back turned politely again. "He does that on purpose?" she asked. "I think he has decided your son does not want to be stared at." Liam pretended not to listen. Dogs stare before they jump. Cole shook his head. Bad handlers let dogs stare too long. That earned him a look from Hannah, not soft exactly, but less guarded. "You sound like your father." "That a complaint?" "No." Her voice changed. "Not at all." The progress did not stop Bryce from filing a formal concern. It arrived as an email from the county, then as a printed notice in Cole's mailbox, because bureaucracy liked to wear both belt and suspenders. Surprise inspection. Containment, sanitation, temperament, emergency procedures, staffing capacity. Failure could result in removal of the dogs. Cole read it twice, then set it beside the notebooks. Outside, the dogs barked once in a short ripple as a plow passed the road. Ranger did not join them. He stood in the yard facing west, nose lifted, body still. Snow had begun again, fine and hard, slanting out of a sky the color of pewter. The radio on the kitchen counter crackled with a weather alert about a deep pressure system building beyond the Cascades and moving inland. Cole listened until the words became numbers, inches, wind speeds, closure warnings. Then he looked at the inspection notice, the old photograph, and the dog waiting in the stormlight. Ranger turned his head toward the mountains, and Cole knew without knowing how that the weather coming for them would not care whether the county paperwork was ready. The first inspection morning came in gray and cold, with snow falling over McCall, Idaho in soft flakes large enough to land whole on a sleeve before melting. The Bennett kennel yard looked cleaner than it had in years. Not polished and pretty like Bryce Dalton's brochures, but orderly in the way useful places are orderly, with shoveled paths. Dry straw stacked under tarps, water buckets steaming faintly after Cole filled them. And 19 German shepherds watching from their runs with a guarded attention that no longer looked like panic. Cole had slept 3 hours. His beard held frost. His left shoulder ached from swinging a shovel, and his right hand carried a half-moon scrape from where Atlas had mistaken a loose glove for a small emergency requiring immediate theft. The scrape did not bother him. The inspection did. Not because the place was unsafe, but because a frightened dog could undo 3 weeks of patience in one unlucky second if a stranger moved too fast. Mason arrived before the county SUV, cheeks red from the cold, carrying a thermos his foster mother had sent and wearing the solemn expression of a man going into court. "I made a checklist," he said. Cole took the notebook page. The handwriting leaned in several directions, but the list was good. Gates, water, records, leashes, medical binder, emergency contacts, no loose tools. "You did well." Mason's eyes dropped to the snow. "It is just a list. Most good rescues start with just a list." That was not a saying from the notebooks. Cole had made it up because the boy needed to hear something simple and true. Ranger stood in the center run, wearing a blue collar, now his sable coat cleaner after careful brushing, and his old scar protected with balm Linda had left. He watched Mason with what looked suspiciously like command approval. June waited beside him, thinner than Cole liked, but no longer folding herself flat at every metallic sound. She had learned the feed cart meant food, not fear. Atlas had learned nothing about property boundaries, but had learned to sit when asked if the ask came with cheese. The county SUV arrived at 9. Hannah stepped out first, though she was not one of the inspectors. She had come as emergency services liaison, she said, which was a tidy title for the fact that she did not fully trust either side to explain itself. 2 county officers followed a woman named Carol Pike with silver hair under a fur-lined hood, and a younger man named Ben Sutter who carried a tablet and looked as though he would rather be anywhere with central heat. Bryce arrived 5 minutes later in his own truck without being invited, parking at the edge of the yard like a spectator at a winter sport. Cole saw Hannah notice and say nothing. That was how small towns worked. People appeared where drama might happen and called it concern. The inspection began with paperwork. Linda's medical schedule was complete. Vaccinations had dates. Each dog had a brief behavior note. Carol read Ranger's entry twice. "Found missing adult during storm. He located him," Cole said. "I did the paperwork after." "You make that sound ordinary." "The dog did not." Carol looked over the top of the folder and to her credit smiled. Then came the kennel walk. Cole set the rules before anyone entered the double gate. No fingers through wire. No leaning over dogs. No sudden greetings. No testing a dog by startling it. "We are not here to prove they fail," he said. "We are here to see what they can safely handle." Bryce snorted from outside the gate. "Convenient." Carol turned. "Mr. Dalton, if you interfere, you can observe from your truck." Bryce's face reddened and Mason became deeply interested in a shovel handle, so he would not grin. They moved run by run. Some dogs barked, but none threw themselves wildly at the gates. Cole had paired the more anxious ones with steady neighbors. He had learned which dogs did better if he stood near and which did better if he stepped away. When Ben dropped his pen and the metal clip snapped against the concrete, June startled so hard her whole body tucked. Bryce made a small sound, almost a laugh. Cole did not look at him. He crouched sideways outside June's gate, turned his shoulder to her, and spoke low. "You heard it," Nothing follows. June trembled. Ranger in the next run sat down. That simple movement steadied the younger dog more than Cole's voice did. After a minute, June rose. After another, she sniffed the gate. Carol wrote something on her form. You did not correct her. She did not do anything wrong. She panicked. That is not wrongdoing. The words landed quietly, but Hannah looked up. Mason did too. Bryce shifted his weight, snow squeaking under his expensive boots. The inspectors watched a few basic handling demonstrations in the yard. Cole brought out Atlas first because joy, even messy joy, could soften a tense room. Atlas found Mason's glove under the snow with enormous pride, then tried to trade it for the treat pouch which Mason called extortion. Ben laughed before he could stop himself. June crossed the yard on a loose line and returned to her kennel without folding. Two steady females located a hidden cloth with Hannah's scent on it. Ranger did not perform until the end. Cole did not want him turned into a trick. When he finally clipped the long line to the old dog's collar, the yard went quiet. Cole placed a small wool cap belonging to Liam near the woodpile, then asked Mason to hide behind the lower shed after walking a looping path through churned snow. Ranger waited nose up, ignoring the visible tracks that crossed the yard. He chose the wind instead, moved toward the shed, paused at the place Mason had stopped to adjust his boot, then continued around the back and stayed 2 feet from the boy's hiding place. Mason stepped out, face bright despite his attempt to look unimpressed. Carol Pike closed her folder. I have concerns about scale, she said. 19 dogs is a lot for one primary handler. Yes, Cole said. I am building support slowly. Slowly may not satisfy the county. Fast will not help the dogs. That answer hung there. Hannah came forward, then not as a friend, not yet, but as someone who had seen Ranger in a ditch with Harold Pierce, and heard Liam speak of the old dog twice at breakfast. For emergency services, a local cold-weather dog team could be valuable if it is done properly. I am willing to help build the volunteer protocol. Mason's head snapped toward her. Cole kept his face steady. Carol looked at Hannah, then at Cole. Conditional approval for 60 days. Weekly veterinary updates. No public training events without notice. Written volunteer plan by the end of February. Relief moved through Mason before he could hide it. Cole felt it too, though in him it came as a loosening behind the ribs rather than a smile. Bryce stepped closer to the fence. You are all going to regret trusting broken dogs. Ranger turned his head at the sound of Bryce's voice. June, who had been calm, shrank back at once. Cole saw it. So did Linda, who had just arrived at the yard with a box of supplies. Her eyes narrowed. Bryce's jacket carried the faint sweet edge of cigar smoke and cedar oil, and June's fear sharpened around it like a wire pulled tight. Cole looked from June to Bryce, and a new thought opened in him, cold and unwelcome. Have you been to the kennel they came from? He asked. Bryce's mouth tightened. I buy from lots of places. That was not my question. Snow fell between them, patient and white. Bryce said nothing. Ranger stepped forward until his chest nearly touched the wire, not growling, not threatening, simply present. For the first time since the shelter, Bryce Dalton had no joke ready. February settled over McCall, Idaho, with a hard blue cold that made every sound carry farther than it should. Axes rang in distant woodlots, plows scraped roads before dawn, and the dog's breath rose from the Bennett kennel yard in pale clouds that drifted over the fences before vanishing among the pines. Conditional approval changed less than Mason expected, and more than Cole admitted. The county had not saved the dogs. Not really. It had only given Cole 60 days to prove that saving them could become something other than a private act of stubbornness. That meant schedules, volunteer forms, training plans, Insurance calls with people whose voices grew nervous when they heard the words 19 German Shepherds. It meant Cole sitting at the kitchen table late into the night writing policies in plain language, while Ranger slept near the mudroom door and opened one eye whenever the wind touched the house. It also meant people began arriving with offerings. A widow from town brought old towels and said Harold Pierce had told her not to argue. A retired school teacher delivered 3 bags of dog food and corrected Cole's grammar on the intake sign without asking. 2 men who had laughed at the hardware store left a stack of cedar boards by the gate after dark as if kindness counted less if seen in daylight. Cole accepted everything, recorded it, and kept working. He did not know what to do with the small warmth that followed help. Orders he understood, gratitude had moving parts. Hannah came twice a week at first, then more often, always with a practical reason. She brought emergency maps, radio frequencies, spare reflective vests, a list of elderly residents on roads the plow reached late. Liam came with her when school closed, which happened often enough that the boy began to learn the names of the children despite himself. He did not enter the yard. He stood near the outer fence, hands tucked in sleeves, and watched Ranger with an expression caught between fear and longing. Ranger never pushed him. The old dog simply made himself available at a respectful distance, which was more patience than most humans had shown the boy. "He knows," Liam said one afternoon. "Knows what?" Cole asked from where he was repairing a sled runner. "That I do not want him to come close. That is useful information. My mom says you were a SEAL." "I was." "Were you scared?" Cole tightened a bolt, buying a breath. "Yes." Liam looked surprised. "But you still did stuff. Sometimes being brave is just doing the next correct thing while your stomach argues." The boy thought about that. Ranger sneezed as if stomach arguments were beneath him. Liam almost laughed. The first supply run happened 2 days later because Hannah's list had a name circled in red. Mrs. Alvarez lived up a steep private lane where the plow had left a berm taller than her mailbox, and her propane monitor had dropped too low for comfort. A truck could not reach her house without risking the ditch. A person on snowshoes could, but carrying a tank and medication alone would be slow. Cole decided to take Ranger June and a steady black and tan female named Maple. Mason begged to come with the intensity of a boy who had been told too many times that responsibility was something other people owned. Cole gave him a sled harness to check instead of an answer. "If you miss one clip, we do not go." Mason checked every clip twice. They went. Snow squeaked under snowshoes. The sled whispered behind the dog's light, but awkward at turns. Ranger led without drama, choosing packed edges where the crust held. June surprised everyone by working best behind Mason, close enough to his quiet encouragement that her ears stayed forward. Maple pulled as if she had been born with a delivery schedule. Mrs. Alvarez cried when they arrived, which embarrassed Mason more than any scolding could have. She tried to feed them cookies hard enough to patch siding. Cole took one because refusing would have hurt her feelings and because Ranger seemed interested in whether cookies had a professional use. They made 3 more runs that week. Medicine to a widower with a heart condition. Groceries to a couple whose grandson had not been able to get up the hill. Batteries to the small chapel whose furnace thermostat had failed. Nothing dramatic, no headlines. Just dogs moving through snow with useful purpose. Learning the town by scent and slope while the town learned to watch them without flinching. Bryce watched too, though from a distance. His kennel sat across a broad field near the lake road, all clean fencing and heated indoor runs. A place designed to reassure customers. Yet his dogs barked themselves ragged when the wind rose and his packed exercise yard turned to a slick sheet after every thaw and freeze. Cole saw him once at the feed store buying supplements in expensive tubs. Bryce saw Cole buying ointment for cracked paws and looked as if he wanted to say something sharp but could not find the old pleasure in it. Boasting needed an audience that still believed. By mid-February, the weather alert became the main voice in town. A deep Pacific system was crossing inland, gathering cold air from the north, promising snow measured in feet and wind that would close passes. People bought bread batteries, generator fuel. Hannah's phone did not stop. Cole checked roofs, gates, radios, and sled harnesses. He moved extra straw into the tack room. He asked Linda to keep medical supplies ready, and she told him she had been ready since 1978. On the afternoon before the storm, Hannah came up with Liam to drop off laminated maps. The sky had gone a strange flat white, not storming yet, only waiting. Liam stood by the fence while Hannah and Cole spread maps on the hood of her SUV. Ranger lay inside the yard with his head on his paws. "Mom," Liam said, "can I give him a biscuit if Mr. Bennett does it too?" Hannah went still. Cole looked at her, letting the decision stay hers. She swallowed. Outside the fence, Cole handed Liam a biscuit and walked with him to the gate. Ranger lifted his head but did not rise. "Toss it underhand," Cole said. Liam's hand trembled. The biscuit landed short. Ranger stood, walked to it, ate it neatly, then sat again, closer by 2 feet, but not too close. Liam breathed out like someone setting down a heavy bucket. Then the radio on Hannah's shoulder crackled, a call from dispatch. Not yet the big storm, a smaller trouble. A child had slipped behind a house on Larch Street, possibly into the drainage cut. Hannah answered, her voice turning professional, then froze as the address came through. Her mother's house, Liam's grandmother. Cole looked beside him. The boy was no longer at the fence. The biscuit bag lay open in the snow. Hannah turned once fast, scanning the yard, the road, the trees. Ranger was already on his feet, nose high, body pointed toward town. Snow began again over McCall, Idaho, in narrow silver streaks that blurred the road between the Bennett place and town. Hannah drove too fast until Cole told her once quietly to keep the wheels under her, and that was enough because fear had not made her foolish, only human. Ranger rode in the back of the county SUV with his harness on, standing braced, despite the turn's nose working at the cracked window. Cole sat beside him with one hand looped through the guide line and the other pressed flat against the floor to steady himself. He had seen parents receive bad news in places far from Idaho. Seen the moment when the world pulled away from their faces and left them standing in a thinner air. He did not want that for Hannah. He did not want it for Liam, who had just begun to believe that a dog might keep its distance on purpose. The drainage cut behind Hannah's mother's house was not large in summer. In winter, under 3 feet of blown snow, it became a soft trap with edges hidden by overhanging brush. Liam had gone outside to retrieve a blue sled the wind had taken from the porch. By the time his grandmother noticed the open door, the yard held too many marks and not enough boy. Hannah parked crooked at the curb. Her mother stood on the porch in slippers and a coat, hands pressed to her mouth, repeating that she had only turned away for a minute. Cole did not let the sentence become a room anyone had to live in. "Show me the door," he used. Ranger dropped from the vehicle and stood still while Cole took Liam's knit cap from Hannah. The old dog sniffed once, then again, and turned not toward the visible tracks near the driveway, but toward the side yard where wind had combed the snow smooth. "He went that way?" Hannah asked. Cole watched Ranger's tail, low and steady, watched his head lift to catch scent thrown sideways by the wind. "Ranger thinks so." They followed. Cole moved slowly enough not to trample clues, fast enough that Hannah's breath shortened behind him. The dog crossed the yard, paused by a lilac bush, then angled toward the drainage cut. No barking, no drama, only that intense, terrible certainty of a good dog reading what people could not. At the edge, Ranger stopped and looked down. Cole dropped to his knees. "Liam." The snow answered with silence. Hannah made a sound that was almost his name and almost a prayer. Ranger stepped carefully along the rim, then lay flat, front paws reaching toward a sag in the snowpack beneath a screen of brush. Cole saw the smallest movement, a blue mitten, He was already digging with gloved hands before thought caught up. "Do not climb down," he told Hannah. "Call it in. I need a ladder or rope from the garage. Now!" His voice had gone into that calm place people sometimes mistook for lack of feeling. It was feeling sharpened into tool shape. Hannah moved. Cole cleared snow from around the mitten, then the sleeve. Then Liam's pale face tucked under a crust of powder where a hollow had formed above the drainage pipe. The boy blinked but did not speak. Ranger pressed his body near the opening, not on the boy, just close enough to block wind. "Hey, Liam," Cole said, keeping his tone ordinary because ordinary was a rope, too. "You found a poor place for sled storage." The boy's lips moved. "Sorry. That is a conversation for later. Right now your job is to keep looking at Ranger." Ranger gave a soft huff. Liam's eyes fixed on him. Hannah returned with rope and a neighbor came running with a ladder. The rescue took 11 minutes. It felt both longer and shorter than that, the way all frightening minutes do. Liam came out cold, wet, and shaking but conscious, wrapped in coats before the ambulance arrived. When Hannah dropped to her knees beside him, Ranger stepped back, giving mother and son the space grief had once taken from them too quickly. Cole stood with snow to his thighs and his heart beating hard enough to hurt. Liam, wrapped like a small bundle, reached one hand from the blanket. It did not reach for Cole. It reached for Ranger. The old dog lowered his head and let the boy's fingers touch the fur between his ears. No one in that yard spoke for a moment. Some kinds of proof are too quiet for applause. After the ambulance checked Liam and cleared him to go home with monitoring, Hannah walked to Cole at the curb. Her face was raw from cold and fear. "Thank you," was what she said. But the words carried more than manners. Cole nodded. He wanted to tell her Ranger had done the work. He wanted to step away from the warmth in her eyes, because warmth asked questions he did not know how to answer. Instead, he said, "He did well." Hannah looked at Ranger, then back. "So did you." That evening, the story moved through town with unusual accuracy because too many neighbors had seen it. Ranger had found Liam. Cole had dug him out. The old dog had stayed calm. The boy who feared dogs had touched his head. At the hardware store the next morning, nobody used the phrase "wolf army." One man asked if the dogs needed blankets. Another asked whether Cole would consider the training volunteers after the storm passed. Bryce Dalton stood by the coffee machine, silent, his jaw working around words he did not drink. Mason heard all of it and arrived at the Bennett place, walking taller than usual. "They know now," he said. Cole was clearing snow from the lower gate. "They know one thing. That Ranger is good. Ranger was good before they knew." Mason frowned, then nodded slowly. The distinction mattered. For the rest of the day, Cole trained as if no miracle had occurred. He knew how quickly praise could become pressure. June worked a short scent path and succeeded. Atlas found the correct glove and only briefly considered stealing the decoy. Maple pulled the supply sled with a seriousness that made Mason salute her when Cole was not looking. Liam remained at home under blankets, but Hannah sent a photograph that night, the boy asleep on the couch, with the blue mitten on the table beside him, and a hand-drawn picture of a sable German shepherd taped to the lamp. Cole stared at the photo longer than he meant to. Ranger, lying by the stove, thumped his tail once without opening his eyes. By then, the big storm had begun to arrive in earnest. The first band hit after midnight, rattling the windows and filling the yard with snow that fell sideways. At dawn, the world outside the kitchen glass was white and moving. The radio spoke of closed schools, closed roads, downed lines west of town, and wind gusts building over the ridges. Cole stood in the mudroom listening. The dogs were quiet, all 19 of them, as if some old current had passed through the kennels in the night. Ranger rose slowly. Outside beyond the pines, the mountain gave a low sound under the storm, and every dog in the yard turned toward it before any human heard the first call for help. The storm did not strike McCall, Idaho, all at once. It tightened around the town hour by hour like a white hand closing. Morning came without sunrise. Snow crossed the windows in long horizontal sheets. Power flickered on the east side, and the lake disappeared so completely that people who had lived beside it for 50 years could not have pointed to the shore. At the Bennett place, Cole moved through the kennel yard with his hood cinched tight and a headlamp burning against the gray. The dogs were restless but not frantic. That mattered. Fear runs through a kennel faster than fire if one animal breaks and others follow. But Ranger stood in the central run with his nose high and his old body still, and the others took their measure from him. Cole fed them lightly checked paws, fitted harnesses on the steadier dogs, and moved emergency gear into the mudroom. Mason arrived before the county closed, the road completely brought by Linda in her clinic truck because, as she put it, if the boy was going to sneak here anyway, I preferred he arrive with all his bones arranged correctly. Mason denied the sneaking part badly. Linda left medical supplies, looked over the dogs, and told Ranger he was too old for foolishness. Ranger sneezed on her sleeve. "That is not a contract," she warned. By mid-morning, Hannah's voice came over the radio with the new rhythm of a dispatcher juggling too many emergencies and not enough hands. A man on oxygen needed backup batteries delivered on Warren Wagon Road. A diabetic woman on a side lane had medication at the pharmacy but no passable route. The small chapel at the edge of town had opened as a warming center, but its generator pull cord had snapped. None of those calls sounded like the kind that makes legends. They sounded like ordinary people getting squeezed by weather. That was why Cole answered. He did not send all the dogs, he chose with care. Maple and Atlas for sled work, June for a short, confidence-building route with Mason. Ranger for decisions. They moved in teams never far enough to become the emergency themselves. Snowshoes sank deep despite packed trails. The sled runners hissed and jolted. Once Atlas tried to rescue a scarf from a mailbox and had to be reminded that not every dangling cloth represented a missing person. Mason laughed so hard he fogged his goggles. Cole let him. Humor kept fear from freezing solid. At the chapel, two elderly men watched the dogs pull a crate of batteries and soup cans to the door, and one of them said he had called those dogs a bad idea last week. Cole waited. The man cleared his throat. "I have been wrong before breakfast plenty of times." That was as close to public repentance as mountain men often came. By afternoon, the town's opinion had begun to shift in small, practical ways. People called Hannah not only with complaints or fear, but with useful details. A gate open on Larch Street, a drift blocking the alley behind the pharmacy, a retired lineman offering his snowmobile if anyone could get fuel to him. Cole heard names he recognized from hardware store laughter, now asking where to bring blankets and which roads the dogs could safely travel. Respect came slowly, then all at once, though never as cleanly as stories pretend. Bryce Dalton remained the stone in the road. He had not mocked Ranger after Liam's rescue, but he had not apologized either. Around noon, he radioed through Hannah, voice clipped and strained, requesting advice on kennel roof load. Cole gave it without comment. "Clear the leeward side first. Do not send one man alone. Move dogs out from the end runs if beams bow." Bryce grunted thanks as if the word had been stored too long in a cold shed. 2 hours later, a sound rolled across the valley, muted by snow, but heavy enough that every dog in the Bennett yard barked once and stopped. Cole was in the tack room repairing a strap. Ranger rose. Mason looked toward the ridge. "What was that?" The radio answered before Cole could. Hannah's voice cut through static. "Structural collapse reported at Dalton Kennels. Possible injuries unknown. Bryce also reports his daughter Emily is missing from the training slope above the property, last seen checking a fence line before the roof gave way. Visibility near zero." Mason went pale. Cole reached for Ranger's harness. Hannah confirmed Emily's age and clothing. 22. Gray parka, red hat, black snow pants. Bryce says she knows the property, but the upper slope drops into old logging cuts. Bryce's voice broke into the channel raw in a way Cole had never heard. Bennett, I need the dog. Not dogs, the dog. Ranger looked up as if called by a name older than his own. Cole keyed the radio. We are coming. Stay off the slope unless you have a visual. If you wander, we search for two. Bryce did not argue. That frightened Cole more than argument would have. He loaded Ranger, Maple, and a younger, steady male named Scout into the truck with Mason climbing in before Cole could tell him not to. The road to Dalton Kennels was a tunnel of moving white. Twice Cole had to stop and step out to find the edge by boot. Mason sat silent, one hand on the dashboard, the other gripping a coil of rope. You can be scared, Cole said without looking from the windshield. I am not. Then you are doing a fine imitation. Mason swallowed. Emily was nice to me once, at the shelter. She told Bryce to stop talking like I was not there. Cole nodded. Kindness leaves tracks too. At the Dalton property, the polished order of the big kennel had been broken open by weather. One storage roof had folded inward under snow load, not over the main dog runs, thank God, but close enough to scatter workers and frighten every animal on the place. Bryce stood near the drive without his hat hair plastered with snow, face emptied of performance. He looked older. She went up to check the west fence, he said. I told her not to. She said one of the dogs was loose. I thought she came back. Cole took the red hat Emily had worn the previous day from Bryce's shaking hand. Ranger sniffed it, then lifted his nose into the wind. For a moment he did nothing. Snow struck his gray muzzle. His scarred leg trembled once. Then he turned toward the slope behind the kennel, away from the obvious path, toward a stand of firs bent low under the storm. Bryce started after him. Cole put a hand out. Behind me, on the rope, no shouting. The other man opened his mouth, then shut it. They climbed. The world narrowed to rope dog breath and the dark vertical lines of trees. Ranger moved slowly, choosing each step. Maple followed with Mason. Scout circled once, caught something lost, it returned. Halfway up the slope, Ranger stopped beside a fallen spruce whose branches had trapped blown snow into a false floor. He pawed once carefully. Cole knelt and brushed snow away until a strip of gray fabric showed beneath the needles. Emily's sleeve. She was conscious cold, pinned gently by branches rather than crushed tears frozen at her lashes. But voice steady enough to whisper that the loose dog had gone home without her. Bryce made a sound that had no pride in it. They freed her with saw and patience, wrapped her and started down. Then the mountain gave a deep, soft whoomp beneath the storm, the kind of sound snow makes when weight decides to move. Ranger's head snapped toward the road beyond the lower trees, not toward safety. He pulled once hard and Cole saw him choose. The old dog was not leading them home. He had found another track. The west road below Dalton Kennels had almost disappeared under the storm, and McCall, Idaho lay beyond it like a lantern wrapped in white cloth. Wind pushed snow through the trees in hard gusts, filling every hollow, softening every ditch, making the familiar land behave like a stranger. Cole stood on the slope with Ranger pulling toward the lower road. Emily wrapped in a rescue blanket behind him. Bryce on the rope with one hand on his daughter's shoulder, and the other clenched so hard his knuckles showed pale through his gloves. We have to get her down, Bryce said, but the old certainty had gone out of his voice. It was no longer a command. It was a father's fear asking permission to speak. Cole looked at Ranger. The dog was not frantic. He had chosen a line and held it body angled into the wind nose working above the snow. Maple stood behind Mason, ears forward. Scout circled twice, then pointed the same direction. 3 dogs, 1 answer. Cole keyed the radio. Hannah, Emily is located and able to move with assistance. We are redirecting toward the lower west road. Dogs indicate another scent path. Static chewed the first half of her reply. Then her voice came back. Cole, confirm you are redirecting before extraction. Affirmative. Send anyone you can to Dalton's lower gate with sled and medical kit. We may have a second incident. There was a pause just long enough for him to hear the wind fill it. Copy. Be careful. He almost answered with something dry, but the storm took the humor from his mouth. They moved down through firs so bowed with snow that their branches brushed shoulders and dropped cold powder into collars. Ranger led slowly. That saved them. Twice the snow gave way near covered rocks. Once Bryce stepped too wide and sank to his hip. But he did not swear, did not blame, did not shout. He waited while Mason and Cole hauled him free. Emily, pale but steady, whispered encouragement to Maple, who accepted it like a professional. At the bottom of the slope, the faint shape of the west road appeared, not plowed now. Barely a raised band between ditches. Ranger crossed it without hesitation and climbed the bank beyond. Cole's stomach tightened. Beyond that bank lay the old logging cut that eventually met the county route toward the school bus turnaround. He had heard the earlier radio traffic. A small bus from a winter program had not checked in. The driver had reported poor visibility near the lower pass, then nothing. People had assumed the bus was delayed or out of range. Assumptions were warm blankets until the cold reached your feet. Hannah, Cole said into the radio, any update on the school bus? This time the answer came fast. No visual, last known near Timber Bend. Plow cannot reach from the south. Parents are gathering at the chapel. Ranger pulled harder. Not wildly, just enough to make the line speak through Cole's gloves. We may be above Timber Bend. Bryce looked at him. That road is below the cut. Yes. You think the dog smells them from here? Cole watched Ranger pause where wind curled up the draw, carrying whatever had happened below. I think he smells something. The descent into the logging cut took 40 minutes and felt like walking through a world made of breath and caution. Cole sent Bryce and Emily toward the lower gate when they reached a safer trail. But Bryce refused to leave until Cole looked him full in the face and said, Your daughter needs heat. That is your job now. The words struck clean. Bryce nodded once. I will bring help back. It sounded like a promise made to someone other than Cole. Mason wanted to stay and Cole almost sent him down too, but the boy had the small sled, the spare blankets, and hands that had grown steadier with each hard task. You stay on my line and you do exactly what I say. Yes, sir. No teenage ornament, no argument. The logging cut funneled wind from the pass. Snow had drifted into rounded shapes that could be bushes, rocks, or nothing. Ranger led them to a place where the road bent around a stand of lodgepole pine. At first, Cole saw only a long mound beside the ditch. Then a faint rectangle appeared beneath snow crust, a side window. The bus had slid nose down into the drift, not rolled, not crushed, only buried enough that it had become part of the storm. Inside, a small hand wiped fog from the glass. Mason made a sound and then swallowed it. We found them, Cole said into the radio. School bus at Timber Bend North Ditch. Occupants visible. Need extraction team, heat saw, and sleds. Approach from Dalton Lower Gate if possible. The reply broke into static and then cheers in the background, quickly muffled. Hannah's voice held steady by force. How many visible? Cole moved along the bus, tapping windows, counting shapes, reading lips through fogged glass. The driver was conscious. Several children waved weakly. One teacher pressed both hands together in prayer when she saw Ranger. At least 9 children, 1 driver, 1 adult. They appear cold but responsive. He kept his voice level because parents might be listening somewhere down the chain. Ranger found the main door buried under packed snow. Atlas would have dug like a joyful fool, but Ranger scraped once, then waited, conserving strength. Cole and Mason began clearing. The snow was dense, heavy with wind crust. Their shoulders burned. Maple pulled the small sled close, carrying blankets and a thermos. Scout lay against the gap once they opened it enough for air, sharing warmth with no instruction at all. Inside the bus, a little girl began to cry at the sight of the dogs, not from fear but relief. Tell them we are coming, Cole said to Mason. The boy leaned toward the cracked window. "You are going to be okay. The dogs found you." His voice did not shake until the last word, and even then it held. They got the door open by inches. Warmth did not come out. Only the sour smell of fear-damp wool and cold metal. Cole climbed partway in and smiled at the children because children deserved a face that told them the world had not ended. "My name is Cole. This is Ranger. He is very strict about everyone getting home before dinner." A boy in the second seat whispered, "Dogs do not know dinner." Ranger chose that moment to huff through the door. Several children laughed, small and thin but real. Mason passed blankets in. They would need time to move everyone safely, and time was the thing the storm spent without asking. Then the mountain above them gave another low, rolling sound. Not a crash. Not yet. A warning. The driver looked toward the slope with wide eyes. Cole felt Ranger stiffen beside him. Snow dust sifted from the pines overhead. The road they had used to reach the bus was already filling behind them. Cole looked uphill, then toward the dark line of trees that hid the old ranger station from every map except the one in his father's notebook. The way out would not be the road. Evening came early to Timber Bend outside McCall, Idaho, though no one could see the sun go down. The sky, the road, the pines, and the buried school bus had all become shades of white and gray, and the only colors left were the red of Ranger's harness, the yellow of Mason's rescue sled, and the small, frightened faces watching Cole from inside the fogged bus windows. The road behind them was closing. Wind swept snow across it so fast that every shovel stroke seemed temporary, like writing your name on water. Cole crouched beside the bus door and let the old training take over. Because the rest of him wanted to think about parents waiting at the chapel, Hannah. At the radio, Bryce, somewhere below with his injured pride finally doing useful work, and the fact that Ranger's scarred leg had begun to tremble. Too many thoughts made a man slow. He needed to be simple. "We move in pairs," he told the driver and the teacher. "Smallest children first, blankets tight, hands inside, nobody runs. Nobody steps off the rope." The teacher, a woman with silver-rimmed glasses and a purple scarf, nodded as if she had been waiting her whole life to obey a calm instruction. "Children," she said, and her voice became the miracle of school teachers everywhere, warm and firm at the edge of disaster. "You heard Mr. Bennett. We are going to be excellent at this." The first child out was the little girl who had cried when she saw the dogs. Her name was Sophie, and she wore boots with plastic stars on them. Ranger stood beside the door and she froze. Cole saw the fear flicker through her. Not fear of Ranger exactly, fear of one more unknown thing. "He is working," Cole said. "He does not need you to pet him." Sophie nodded solemnly, then whispered to Ranger, "Good work." Ranger accepted the performance review. Mason tucked the blanket around her and guided her to the sled where Maple stood braced like a statue. One by one they moved the children out. A boy named Caleb tried to bring his backpack and was told by the teacher that math worksheets would survive disappointment. Another child asked whether the dogs had names. Mason named them all, including Atlas, who was not there but somehow remained relevant because the child liked the idea of a glove thief. The small human details helped. They kept the rescue from turning into a dark shape too large to carry. Cole gave updates by radio whenever the signal allowed. Hannah relayed instructions from the incoming rescue team. "County crew is moving from Dalton Lower Gate. Bryce is with them. Linda is at the chapel setting up triage." Cole almost asked why Bryce was with them, then remembered the man saying he would bring help back. Good. Let him put his weight against the right door for once. The last children came out slower. Cold had stiffened them. The driver needed help stepping down. The teacher tried to insist she was fine until her knees disagreed, and Mason, without being told, moved the sled close and said, "Ma'am, Ranger says teachers ride." She looked at the old dog, then at Mason. "Well, I try not to argue with faculty." Cole would have laughed if the slope above had not groaned again. It was a deep settling sound, the mountain shifting under its own white burden. Ranger's head snapped toward the trees, not toward the road, toward the ridge path Cole had seen in his father's notebook the night before the inspection. The old ranger station sat above the logging cut built back when men still thought heavy beams and stubbornness could solve most weather. His father had marked it as emergency shelter stove, intact access by north tree line if lower road blocked. Cole had not walked that path since he was 12. Snow had erased it now. Ranger had not. "We are not waiting here," Cole said. Hannah's reply came through broken. "Repeat. Moving group to old ranger station above Timber Bend. Road unsafe. Tell rescue team to follow my markers from the bus. We will leave flags." Static, then her voice lower. "Cole, that station is still standing. We are about to find out." Mason looked at him. No question, only trust, which was heavier than doubt. Cole tied the children into the guide rope with simple loops, not tight enough to trap enough to keep the group together. Maple and Scout pulled sleds with the smallest children. Ranger led. Cole walked behind him. Mason stayed midline, counting heads every 20 steps. The teacher, wrapped in blankets, repeated the count back. It became a rhythm. 1 through 11. 1 through 11. Wind shoved them sideways when they left the road. Snow slapped faces. Branches dropped powder without warning. A child began to whimper, and the boy named Caleb told her that Ranger knew dinner was waiting, which was apparently comfort enough. Cole watched the old dog's shoulders. Ranger moved with economy now. No wasted steps. He paused at places where the crust hid gaps, chose the lee side of trees, avoided a hollow Cole would not have seen until someone sank. Once he stopped completely and refused to move forward. Cole tested the snow ahead with a pole and felt it drop through empty space under the crust. A covered washout. He looked at Ranger. Good read. The dog did not preen. Professionals rarely do. Halfway up, Cole's own past came for him. It did not arrive as a memory with edges. It came as cold in the chest white slope, a voice on a radio turning thin, the helpless math of distance and time. For one step, he was not in Idaho, but somewhere else, younger and unable to pull a friend from snow before the weather claimed the chance. His boot slipped. The rope tugged. Ranger stopped and looked back. So did Mason. The boy's face was white with cold, but his eyes were steady. "Next correct thing," Mason said. The words Cole had given Liam came back to him in a teenager's cracked voice. Cole breathed in. Held, breathed out. "Next correct thing," he repeated. They moved. The ranger station appeared as a dark block between trees just as daylight thinned into the flat blue of storm evening. The roof held. Snow buried the lower windows, but the door opened after Cole shouldered it twice, and Bryce, arriving from the lower route with 2 rescuers, threw his weight beside him on the 3rd tree. The room inside smelled of old wood, mouse dust, and salvation. They brought the children in, lit the stove with fire starters from Mason's pack, and wrapped everyone in every dry layer they had. Linda's voice came through the radio, fierce with relief, giving warming instructions. Hannah asked for names. The teacher read them, voice breaking, only once. When she finished, the radio stayed silent for a breath, and Cole knew somewhere at the chapel parents were hearing the list. Bryce stood near the door, snow melting from his hair, staring at Ranger. "He brought them here," he said. It was not a question. Cole was too tired for pride. "He read the wind," Bryce swallowed. "And you trusted him." "Yes." Outside, sirens sounded faintly through the storm. Not close yet, but coming. Ranger lay down by the door, his scarred legs stretched in front of him. Blood did not show through the wrap Cole had placed there, but the old dog had gone very still. Cole crouched beside him, laid a hand on the sable's shoulder, and felt the tremor beneath the fur. Ranger opened one eye, calm as ever, while the rescued children warmed themselves around the stove. For the first time all day, Cole let fear speak inside him, and it said the name of the dog. Night settled over the old ranger station above McCall, Idaho. with the storm still pushing at the walls and the stove working as if it had been waiting years for a reason to glow again. Snow packed itself against the windows, the door hinges creaked, and inside the small room children slept in uneven piles of blankets while adults spoke in low voices and moved carefully, so no one woke into fear a second time. Rescue crews arrived in stages guided by the flagging tape Cole and Mason had tied along the tree line and by Maple's sled track where the wind had not erased it yet. Linda came in with 2 EMTs, cheeks red, eyes wet in a way she would deny if asked. She checked the children, the driver, the teacher, Emily, and then Ranger because Cole's hand on the old dog's shoulder told her more than any report. He overused the old injury. She said softly. Cold made it worse. He needs warmth, rest, and a handler who does not pretend worry is a medical strategy. Cole nodded. He had no clever answer. Ranger lay on a folded coat near the stove, eyes half closed, accepting examination with grave impatience. Sophie, the little girl with star boots, woke long enough to ask whether the dog was going to be okay. Linda looked at Cole before answering, then gave the child the truth with gentleness. He is tired, sweetheart, very tired, but he is with people who love him. Sophie considered that and then pulled one small mitten from her pocket and set it beside Ranger's paw like an offering. For good work, she whispered. Ranger's tail moved once. It was enough to make 3 adults turn away at the same time. Bryce stood near the far wall, a blanket around his daughter's shoulders, watching all this as if the room were a church and he had arrived late to the sermon. He had helped carry children. He had cleared snow from the door. He had taken instructions from Mason without making a joke which Mason would remember for years. But apology was another mountain, and Bryce had spent most of his life building roads around that one. Cole did not force it. A forced apology is only pride wearing different clothes. Near midnight, when the wind dropped enough for the crews to plan transport down, Bryce stepped outside onto the covered porch where Cole stood with a cup of coffee gone lukewarm. Snow still fell, but now it came softer, as if the storm had spent its anger and was only finishing the work. The pines bowed under moonless dark. Below them, McCall's few visible lights trembled through the weather. Bryce stood beside Cole for a long while. Neither man spoke. At last, Bryce said, "I knew that breeder." Cole kept his eyes on the trees. "I figured. Bought from him twice, years ago. He had papers that looked fine. Dogs looked fine. I did not ask enough questions." The words came out with difficulty, not because they were complicated, but because they had weight. June knew my coat smell, cigar and cedar oil. I used to wear the same when I went there. Cole said nothing. The silence did not absolve Bryce, but it did not crush him either. "I called your dogs broken because it was easier than admitting I might have helped break the road that led them here." Bryce wiped snow from his face with a bare hand. "That is ugly to say. Truth often arrives poorly dressed." Bryce gave a short laugh with no humor in it. "Your father say that?" "No, that one is mine." The older man looked at him. "I was wrong." Cole turned then. Bryce's face, usually arranged for performance, had been stripped down by cold fear, and the sight of his daughter sleeping under a rescue blanket. Because the dog he mocked had found her. "About the dogs," Bryce said. "About you. About what makes a working dog worth keeping." "I was wrong." The words did not fix everything. They did not unfrighten June or erase the shelter row or turn pride into humility overnight. But they were real, and real things did not need to be large to begin. "What will you do with that?" Cole asked. Bryce looked through the window at Ranger. "If you will teach me, I will change the kennel. Less breeding. More rehab. I have heated runs, money staff, and too many empty excuses. I can take the old ones nobody buys. I can stop pretending pretty is the same as useful." Cole studied him. "This is not a weekend project. I know. Dogs do not care about speeches." Bryce nodded. "I know that too now. Behind them, the door opened and Mason stepped out carrying an armful of damp blankets. He froze when he saw Bryce's old habits rising. Bryce looked at him and after a moment said, "You handled that rope well tonight." Mason blinked. "Thanks. I should have said your name before at the shelter instead of talking over you." Mason did not know where to put that, so he said it carefully nowhere. "Okay." Bryce accepted the small answer. It might have been the wisest thing he had done all night. By dawn, the storm had broken into a pale, exhausted calm. The route down took time but not terror. Children rode wrapped on sleds. Parents met them near the lower gate and crossed snowbanks with the wild, stumbling grace of people reaching what they feared they had lost. Hannah was there, eyes searching until she saw Cole, then Ranger on a sled beside him. Liam stood with her bundled to the nose. When the old dog lifted his head, the boy broke away and came as close as Cole allowed. "He saved them?" Liam asked. Cole looked at the children, the parents, Mason, Maple, Scout, Bryce, holding Emily upright, and Hannah with one hand pressed to her mouth. "They all did." Liam nodded solemnly as if that answer fit better than any simpler one. The next days passed in a blur of plows, news vans kept at a respectful distance by Linda's Blair County meetings. Thank you casseroles and sleeping dogs. Ranger's leg improved slowly. Cole moved his bed into the mudroom for 3 nights because the old dog disliked being checked on, and therefore needed checking on. Mason told everyone Ranger was retired from field work, then asked Ranger privately whether he agreed. Ranger did not. The town changed in ways both visible and quiet. At the hardware store, a jar appeared labeled Bennett Search Dog Fund, written in the retired schoolteacher's corrected hand. At church, families prayed by name for the children, the rescuers, and the dogs. Bryce came to the Bennett place one clear afternoon with no audience and no speech. He brought 2 new kennel heaters and a box of old files from the breeder in case they helped identify the dog's lines. June saw him from her run and stepped back. Bryce stopped at once, lowered his eyes, and waited for Cole to tell him where to put the heaters. That was the first lesson. Not fixing, not forcing, waiting. Ranger watched from the porch, his bandaged legs stretched in a patch of winter sun. The old dog had led them home through a storm, but now he seemed content to let humans learn the slower trail. Spring came late to McCall, Idaho. Not with trumpets, but with dripping eaves, softening roads in the first dark circles of earth, showing beneath the pines. Snow slid from the kennel roofs in heavy sighs. The lake loosened at the edges. The mountain, which had spent the winter speaking in wind and weight, grew quiet enough for birds to risk a morning song. At the Bennett place, 19 German shepherds stood in cleaner coats and stronger bodies than the town remembered from the shelter row. And if someone had driven up without knowing their history, they might have mistaken them for dogs that had always been wanted. Cole knew better. Wanting was not a condition they had arrived with. It had been built day by day through warm food, dry bedding, steady hands, and the refusal to turn fear into a verdict. Ranger walked with a limp when the weather changed, but he walked where he pleased, which was most often between the porch and the central yard, supervising with the weary dignity of an old commander who had discovered that retirement did not prevent incompetence in others. Atlas continued to steal gloves and once managed to carry off Bryce Dalton's wool hat during a training visit, an event that Mason described as justice with ears. June no longer flattened at the smell of cigar smoke because Bryce stopped wearing that coat to the Bennett place. More importantly, he stopped expecting her to forgive him on his schedule. He came once a week to help clean runs, repair fencing, and learn the plain work that never made a brochure. His own kennel changed slowly. The glossy ads disappeared first, then the breeding program shrank. Heated runs that once held young sale dogs began holding older shepherds from shelters in Boise, Twin Falls, and Spokane, dogs with cloudy eyes, crooked tails, nervous stomachs, and names no one had bothered to remember correctly. Bryce remembered them now, not perfectly. He stumbled. He overcorrected. He asked Cole questions that would once have embarrassed him. Cole answered because his father's notebooks had been clear about that too. Knowledge kept too tightly becomes another kind of kennel. Hannah became part of the Bennett place in the way some people enter a room quietly. And later you cannot imagine the room without them. She still worked the 911 desk, still spoke in that calm voice that could hold a stranger together until help arrived. But on her off days, she came with paperwork, sandwiches, and a practical eye for systems Cole would have ignored until they tripped him. Liam came too. The boy who had once stood behind his mother now sat on the porch steps reading adventure books aloud while Ranger rested his head against Liam's boot. He did not pet every dog. He did not need to. He learned that trust was not a door flung open but a gate unlatched from both sides. Mason changed in less visible ways, which meant the changes mattered more. He finished his community service hours and kept coming. He learned radio protocol, canine first aid map reading, and how to make coffee strong enough that Linda called it a legal concern. In April, Hannah helped him apply for a summer EMT youth program. When the acceptance email came, Mason read it 3 times and then stood in the kennel yard pretending the wind had made his eyes water. Cole did not expose him. He only said, "You earned it." Mason nodded, jaw working. Ranger rose, crossed the yard, and leaned his shoulder against the boy's leg. No speech could have improved on that. The town held a small service of thanks at the white church near the lake once the roads were clear. It was not a grand event. Grand things made people dress up too much and forget the point. The families from the bus came along with Harold Pierce. Mrs. Alvarez, the retired school teacher, the deputy who had once asked whether Ranger belonged to Cole, and several men from the hardware store who now carried dog biscuits in coat pockets as if they had always been thoughtful. Linda sat in the second pew with her arms folded, daring anyone to become dramatic. Bryce came with Emily and stood near the back until Cole waved him forward. Hannah read the names of those rescued during the storm. The teacher read the names of the dogs who had worked that night. Ranger, Maple Scout, June in training, Atlas in spirit, which made the children laugh. Then Pastor Wilkes, an old man with a voice like warm gravel, prayed not for fame or victory but for the wisdom to recognize God's help when it arrived in forms people had dismissed. Cole looked down at his hands during that prayer. They were scarred in ordinary ways now. Wire-scraped, cold, cracked tooth nick from a panicked dog. Taking food too fast, old military marks fading under new work. For years he had thought healing would feel like forgetting. It did not. It felt like remembering without being dragged under. It felt like standing in a church with a woman beside him, a boy he trusted in the next pew, a town breathing easier around him, and an old dog asleep in the truck outside because church pews were too narrow for his rank. At the Bennett place after the service, they mounted a wooden board near the kennel gate. Mason had burned the letters himself. Bennett Mountain Search Dogs in Rehabilitation. Beneath it were 19 small brass tags, one for each German Shepherd from the shelter row. Some would become search dogs. Some would become therapy dogs for veterans and children. Some would simply become beloved porch guardians and professional bowl inspectors. That was enough. Worth did not have to be dramatic to be true. Cole opened his father's notebook that evening at the kitchen table. Ranger slept near the stove, twitching in a dream. Outside, meltwater ran beneath the remaining snow, carrying winter downhill in silver threads. Cole turned to a blank page and wrote the date. He wrote the count 19 alive. He wrote Ranger resting well. Mason accepted Liam, read 3 chapters without fear. Bryce waited outside June's run for 7 minutes and called that progress. Then he paused, pen hovering. The old line from his father and grandfather waited in memory. Snow remembers the honest tracks. Cole wrote beneath it, and God sometimes sends the rejected ones to lead us home. He underlined it once, not because he was a man given to ceremony, but because some truths deserved a mark. On the porch, the last light touched the melting yard. Ranger woke rose stiffly and came to stand beside him at the open door. Together they looked over the kennel, the pines, the town road, and the mountains that had nearly taken and then returned so much. Months earlier, 19 unwanted dogs had stood behind shelter wire while people laughed at the man foolish enough to save them. Now no one laughed. The town had learned what Cole had seen in the first quiet stare of an old sable shepherd. The rejected thing is not always broken. Sometimes it is waiting for the right weather, the right work, and the right person patient enough to read its tracks. Sometimes God sends help in a form we would have overlooked. A tired dog, a quiet boy, a neighbor who has been wrong and is trying clumsily but sincerely to become better. This story reminds us that worth is not always shiny, young, easy, or approved by the crowd. The Lord often works through what others reject, and He asks us to look with softer eyes and steadier hearts. If this touched you, comment Amen. As a small prayer for everyone who feels forgotten, and share it with someone who needs hope today. May your home be protected, may your heart stay warm through hard seasons, and may you always recognize the faithful tracks leading you back to love. Subscribe for more stories of mercy, courage, and the quiet miracles that still happen when people choose kindness over fear.